Leslie Edward Jury was born in Bonnydoon, Victoria on the 28th of July 1893, although we always celebrate his birthday on July 26th. His paternal grandparents were Samuel James Jury of Hatherley, Devon, and Susan Skinner of Newton Abbot, Devon. They married at Burra, South Australia on the 7th of December 1856, settled at Reedy Creek, Victoria, and later took up land at Bonnydoon. The maternal grandparents were Fritz and Christina Jurgens, who were of German and Spanish origin. My grandmother always said her mother was born in Spain and Fritz was her second husband. They migrated to Australia in 1866 after spending some time in Lima, Peru. Fritz mined gold at Dry Creek, close to Bonnydoon. Leslie's father, Frank, married the younger Christina Jurgens at Mansfield on the 17th of November 1890. Originally, Frank had a sheep property at Ancona, close to Bonnydoon, but he became ill and later ran hotels in Allendale, Talbot and Daylesford. After 6 years at school, which was ultimate in those days, the young Les worked on farms until he was accepted by the Victorian Railways as a junior assistant. In the days of the steam locomotive, he worked at the Mont Albert railway station, which in those days was surrounded by paddocks. On the 19th of July 1915, Leslie enlisted in Melbourne as a private, number 3791, in the 14th Battalion, 4th Infantry Brigade, 12th Reinforcements. At the time, his parents were living at 55 Lord Street, Richmond, Victoria. The new recruits trained at Broadmeadows Camp and embarked for overseas on the HMAT Ceramic on the 23rd of November 1915. The original Anzacs were still at Gallipoli, but due for evacuation that subsequently happened on the 19th of December 1915. Well, to start off, I will give you a little idea of my feelings when I was leaving Port Melbourne. I don't think that any of the chaps on the Ceramic will ever forget our send-off. In the morning, we were up at 3 a.m. It started a steady downpour of rain, and we had to stand about in the camp for 2 hours with tedious roll calls and other red tape business. So you can guess how pleased we were when the order was given to march off. Then another wait for the train. At last we were off for more roll calls, and to crown all, the worst hailstorm I've ever seen in Melbourne. And during the hailstorm, the band was giving us a selection of that popular song, This Is the Life. I've got doubts about it. At last we were shown our quarters. Then came word that we could go up on deck. God, will I ever forget that rush up the steps, for we were all after good positions. I just got up on deck as people began to swarm onto the pier. I couldn't help thinking if I was going to pick anyone out of the crowd, but I was lucky, as I was not there 5 minutes before I saw Sister Ivy and my girlfriend Myrtle. It was hard just to have to look at them. Gosh, I would have given anything to have been able to kiss them goodbye. But I suppose, although it was hard, it was better as I did not want them or myself to break down. We waited about 10 minutes before the boat began to move. I shall never forget the sight of the upturned faces of thousands on the pier, the boys on the boat fighting with tears, trying to smile and cheer, and the women, really, it's a shame they should have to face the worst of it, as I reckon they have the worst part, the anxiety and waiting. At last we started to move off slowly. One by one the paper ribbons broke away and the band started Auld Lang Syne. Well, it finished me. I had a nasty lump in my throat. A good howl would have done me good. I stood on the deck watching the crowd and the land slowly fade out of sight. The boys were still cheering, and I couldn't help wondering how many of us were going to come home. There are a lot of chaps there who were there that day, and who have found their last resting place in France. We reached the Heads at 6 p.m. and anchored there until 10 p.m, and then we were off for our long looked forward to voyage to Egypt. I won't bore you with an account of the voyage, as we didn't stop at any ports on the journey, so the novelty of the first few days soon wore off. And if we hadn't had any amount of gambling, I don't know what I would have done to put in the time. I was pretty lucky coming over, as I won £20, and it was useful in after days. Gosh, it was a small fortune in 1915. We reached Port Suez on the 16th of December, but didn't go right in. We anchored about 2 miles out. The Anzac troops at Gallipoli were evacuated to Egypt, where they were joined by reinforcements from Australia to initially defend Egypt and the Suez Canal from an expected Turkish attack that didn't eventuate. The decision to deploy the Australian forces in France required a regrouping of basic infantry divisions to establish and train artillery units to support the infantry in trench warfare. The Anzacs on Gallipoli had very little artillery support and were forced to rely on naval bombardments and antiquated artillery weapons. In 1916, 6 divisions were in training. Volunteers from the infantry were called for to form the new artillery brigades. Les volunteered and became a member of the 47th Battery, 12th Brigade, 4th Division AIF. At Zeetoun, we were very well looked after as regards to food and sleeping accommodation. We had a fairly large hut made out of Egyptian mats. It was all right in hot weather, but not too good when it rained. I saw rain about 4 times all the months I was in Egypt. We started doing the same old drill that we'd learnt the first few weeks we were in camp in Australia. About this time, we got news about the evacuation of the peninsula. It was very depressing, as it made our chance of seeing active service for a long time very remote. We remained at Zeetoun camp until the 3rd of March 1916, and then had our first shift to Tel El Kaiba, about 90 miles from Cairo. We stopped there for about 3 days and then went to the trenches at Ferry's Post, about 50 miles from nowhere in the middle of the desert. It was our first touch of active service. We marched from Tel El Kaiba to the trenches about 40 miles, mostly through sand over our boot tops. The march took us 3 days, and most of us were dead beat on arrival. Some finished in ambulances and wagons. I had a bad time, as I was suffering terribly with my feet, which were one mass of blisters. I was frightened to complain about them, as I thought they might send me home, and that was what I didn't want to happen at this stage. I was in the trenches 17 days, and we had a rough time as water was very scarce. 1 bottle had to last us 24 hours. In the sand and heat, I was always thirsty. During the time we were there, rumours floated around that the Turks were advancing on the canal. Every day their numbers used to go up a couple of thousand. We used to wish they would come, as we would have given them a pretty warm reception. They were forming 2 new divisions in Egypt, viz. The 4th and the 5th. They were very short of artillery and called on the infantry for volunteers. As Scotty, my mate, was anxious to join and we thought we'd get to France sooner, we decided to give it a trial, and I'm glad I did, as I was just about beat with my feet as I could not get water to bathe them. We went back to Tel El Kaiba, to the artillery camp on the 22nd of March. The first night it rained very hard and I slept in a pool of water. I had a bad back for a week, I could hardly move. It was then I found out what the word cobber meant. Scotty was very good to me. He used to undress me and put me to bed, get my tucker for me, and anything else I wanted he used to get. So I've got a lot to thank him for. On the 10th of April, we had another shift to Suraperium, a more desolate place you couldn't imagine. We did a lot of hard work there as we were anxious to get away and time was short. There was one redeeming feature, and that was the good old Suez Canal. Many a time I had a good swim there, and also we used to see a few white women going up the canal in the steamers. You can guess how we used to cheer them, and we'd swim out to the boats for books, etc., that they were kind enough to give us. One day, while on guard at the siding, 2 trucks of beer came in for the canteen. It happened to be my 2 hours on. Oh, I kept guard all right, while one of the boys tapped a keg with a 6-inch nail. Didn't we have backsheesh booze? We filled all our bottles and buried them in the sand until we came off guard, and we had enough to last a week. I don't think I'm a habitual drunkard, but tell me, would you miss that chance if you couldn't get water and the thermometer was 106 in the shade? I also shook some milk and jam on that guard, so it was the most profitable guard I've been on. On Anzac Day, we had a sports meeting on the canal visited by the Prince of Wales. A story is told of his visit. I can't vouch for the truth of it, but the Prince passed a party of Australian soldiers on the road and failed to return their salute, on which the Australians counted him out. The Prince asked one of his staff what that meant, and on being told, he turned, rode back and saluted the boys. They then counted him in, viz. From 10 to 2, and instead of one you say in, so all parties went away satisfied. At last word came through that we were ready for action and we would soon be in France. You can understand my feelings as we'd been waiting for 6 months for this good news. We're all excited and eager, counting the days till we were to sail. At last we were to find out that we had left Australia for something other than eating sand. We left Serapeum on the 4th of June for our long train journey to Alexandria. It took about 12 hours. We reached Alex early in the morning and went straight on board the troop ship, the SS Ionian. We're all very tired, but I wanted to say goodbye to Egypt, the land of sun, heat, flies and sand. It was a grand sight to see all the ships, mostly troop ships. It was a lovely night when we left, and from the deck you could see the sandy desert stretching back from the town, and somehow I was almost sorry I was leaving the land of mysteries. I had some good times there as well as bad ones. This feeling passed when we left the lights of Alex behind us as we steamed for the Mediterranean Sea. We were very crowded on the boat and we had to sleep anywhere. I was lucky to secure the mess table after 2 fights. It made a very comfortable bed. We had to wear our life belts night and day, as there was always the risk of running into a submarine, and we couldn't light a match after dark under a penalty. At this point, there is a gap in the letter. The SS Ionian reached Marseille safely. Apparently, Les got into some difficulty with the authorities and also the language barrier. But his letter follows on. I couldn't make them understand what I wanted. I went through a lot of antics trying to make them understand. Talk about Charlie Chaplin. He was a back number compared to me. At last a French sergeant, who could speak English, came to my aid and straightened things out. I could have kissed him. I was that delighted. I had a meal, a glorious spread of eggs, and about 1 shilling's worth of chips. With the inner man satisfied, I made my way back to the station just in time as they were marching into the train. We had first-class carriages, so we were lucky as we had a 3-day train ride in front of us. From the first minute we started until we finished, I had my head out the window, barring the few hours I was sleeping, as the scenery was the most beautiful I've ever seen. The villages are that close together in the south of France, and it seems like one big town. I noticed there were very few men working in the fields, their places being taken by the girls and the women. Everywhere we stopped, We were warmly welcomed. The worst of it was all the girls wanted souvenirs. After the journey, I was minus my coat buttons, all my badges. In fact, I only had my trouser buttons left. It was very funny trying to talk to them as they couldn't understand us, or we them. But as usual, we got along all right. They knew we were Australian, and that accounts for a lot, as our boys have a good name in France. It was bright daylight until 11 p.m, so we didn't have much sleep on the trip. Every time the train would stop, we used to run up to the engine for hot water to make tea. We had as many as 30 tins of tea every day. We were well treated as regards food. In our carriage there were 3 boxes of bully beef, so we used to throw some out the window to the guards on the line, and how gosh they used to rush it, as meat is a luxury in this country. The people live mainly on vegetables, and perhaps that accounts for their complexions. We all thought that we were going to pass through Paris on our trip. We were disappointed, as we went within 20 miles of it and then turned off. We passed through a big town at that point, and there were lots of people around the stations. And gosh, talk about a reception, I'll never forget it. There was a company of French soldiers on the platform, and they sang the Marseillaise, their national anthem, and we replied with God Save the King. It sounded well to hear 1,000 soldiers sing it. Also they sang Australia Will Be There. We passed a trainload of French wounded from Verdun, and every man wanted to shake hands as the trains slowly passed each other. We held out our hands and touched theirs. What wonderful chaps these French soldiers are, always happy under the worst conditions. On the last morning, we were nearing the war zone. Everywhere there were trains loaded with soldiers, provisions, etc. We finished our journey about 3 p.m, and I was sorry, as it will always be a pleasant memory with me. On arrival in France, the artillery units of the 4th and 5th Divisions spent time with the 1st and 2nd Divisions in the Armistice area in Flanders. When the infantry divisions were moved to the Somme for the offensive in 1916, the artillery remained behind in support of the British in the north. Place names were omitted from Les' letter, as the letter was written under wartime censorship. We went into camp at E, probably Etaples, for a week, and then left to relieve the 1st Division at that's S, where they'd been for 6 weeks. It was very quiet there, but seemed a lot to me as it was my first time in action. It was here that Fritz showed us he could shoot. I did not take much notice of the shells there, but since the more I see of them, the more I wish I were back home. We were in action about 15 days, and were relieved by the 5th Division. We shifted to F about 5 miles away. There was a big push on there, so in the first week we were continually firing and being fired at. It was here that Charlie Jury was wounded, as we were covering his battalion on the night they charged. It was hot while it lasted. About 8 of us went from there to A to be attached to the 11th Battery of New Zealanders until their reinforcements came up. We were very sorry when the time came to leave them, as we were treated very well. They actually had spring beds to sleep on, and though they were only a little way from the front line. I lost most of my kit there as a shell blew up one end of the billet. It caught about 7 chaps. I was lucky enough to be out on the guns at the time. We had our guns at one end of this town, which is in ruins, and plenty of people live in the other end within 4 miles of the front. In places they live closer than that, and I've seen them ploughing in one field and shells bursting in another paddock 100 yards away. Fritz often used to put a shell into the town, and not always for nothing, and I had one very narrow escape there. It gave me quite a start. Went back to F to rejoin our own battery after 14 days. And I remained with them for about 2 weeks. And then as I was ill, just a cold, I was sent to the H hospital. I remained there for a week and was sent to the detail camp at E. After 7 days I was sent to S to join the 4th DAC. The Divisional Ammunition Column DAC is charged with the task of getting the ammunition to the guns, sometimes under fire from enemy guns. It could be a risky business. I was very disappointed about this, as I was anxious to get back to my old battery. Our job now was to take the ammunition up to the guns, and didn't we have some trips in places? We have to do this work in the night time, so try and imagine what it's like on a dark night when you have to go to a battery in a field through shell holes, etc. It's great fun. At one time we worked for 4 days and nights without a break, so I can tell you I was properly beat the last day. When we got back to the billets, I crawled under one of the wagons and fell asleep. In the morning when I woke up, I found all the wagons gone. They had harnessed up and gone out in the night time without me hearing them. I was the only one left in the camp lying out in the paddocks on my own. That night we had our first gas alarm, so we were all up all night with our helmets on. Very unpleasant affairs until you get used to them. The first warning is a big steam hooter that you can hear for miles around. It gives you a very funny feeling when you hear it first. And then when they see the gas cloud coming, every gun opens fire to break it and scatter the gas. I've been lucky as we've not been in a gas cloud yet. We always get the alert if there is any danger of it, but as our gas helmets are safe, we don't worry now. We stopped at S for several weeks, and we went down to a little village in France for a 2-week spell. From here we could just hear the dull boom of the big guns. I was very glad to get away, if only for that short while. I had a great time in this place, as we were the first Australian soldiers there. The people treated us very well. The first Sunday a mate and myself went for a walk to another village about 3 miles away. When we got there, 3 houses were on fire. So we bogged in and made ourselves useful shifting the furniture, etc. It was a very sad sight, as the people who were burnt out had all their menfolk away at the war. We gave one old woman 3 weeks' pay and told her to get a pass to collect money at the camp. This she did, and the boys came to light most handsomely. After this, we were regular heroes in the village and were always warmly welcomed at most of the houses. It was here I met my little sweetheart, the one that's coming home with me. I used to have some great conversations with her. She would do all the talking and I would say, oui. It meant yes in French, so we got on very well. No chance of an argument with her. Before I left, she could talk a little English and I a little French. She was a bonny wee kitty, and I hope I have the chance of seeing her again before I go home. I had one photo of myself, you know, the one in civvy clothes, so I gave it to her. You ought to see the fuss she made over it. You would be amused. The French get very excited over photos. I've shown your photographs of the girls to over 50 people, and they reckon they're très bon. You see, I've picked up quite a bit of this language. We were shifted to Ypres salient to relieve the Canadians. I was there about a week when they detailed us to go up to the front line and build an observation point, known as an OP, for the artillery. On arriving at the trenches, I was pleased to find out that the old 46th Battalion were in the trenches. It was many months since I had seen any of the boys, and I was overjoyed to meet them again. I'm sorry to say, many were wounded and had gone to Blighty. Among them an old Allendale schoolmate of mine, Tom Jones. A good number, of course, have answered their last roll call. We were not on our new job 10 minutes before Pritz put a a shell right over us and buried a couple of the boys, but we got them out all right. I got a hit in the back of the neck with a lump of mud. Thought I was killed, but after I got up I found I was none the worse. We got under cover, and after a lot of talking we decided to go home and come back to work in the night time. That night, when we returned, we found the site was under machine gun fire for the best part of the night. The bullets were whizzing all around us, and we used to spend most of the time on our bellies. We were safe enough from the bullets, but the trouble was getting the stuff in. We had about 100 yards to carry it on our shoulders, and every few minutes one of Fritz's flares would go up and light the place up as bright as day. Of course we had to drop down until the light went out. I was just stepping on the duckboard one night when a bullet went right between my legs and hit the mud in front of me. I jumped, of course, and decided it was time I wasn't in that place and hopped it. Now, don't say anything about my bandy legs again, for if they'd been straight I would have stopped it. This was the most dangerous job I've been on so far, a jolly sight worse than the front line, as you can get under cover there. After a week of this, we decided to go back on day shift, working one shift in the day and the other at night. We wanted to get the job finished, as we'd been promised leave on completion of the job. Going to work in the morning, you could see the enemy's trenches, and he was continually shelling the track. I must have a guardian angel somewhere, for I've had the best of luck so far. One night I was standing on the tram line, if you could call it that, and a chap came along pushing a truck. I stepped aside, and as soon as he got level with me he stopped one in the shoulder. If he had not shifted me, I would have got it. The chap was only a kid about 18 and was only here from England for 3 days, his first time under fire. The same night we had a big bombardment, and we were told to get home to our billet before 11 p.m. We left a bit too late, as we were just in the woods when our guns started firing. Everywhere you looked you could see the flashes of the guns, and the shells kept up one continual whistle through the air. The ground seemed to tremble underneath us. I couldn't help feeling sorry for Fritz in the trenches, and can quite understand why the Hun prisoners say to be in our bombardments is hell. I had taken part in a few bombardments before this, but I've never been so close to the front line when one was on. We stopped watching it, and I can tell you it was a magnificent, though terrible sight, when a few of Fritz's shells burst unpleasantly close. We went back to our little home. Next day, Fritz sent about 120 of his shells around our billet, but he only wounded 3 with them. That wasn't so bad. He made a nice little hole at the back door of the cookhouse, and it was just what we wanted to put the rubbish in. Really, Fritz is a very obliging chap. I was in bed when he started, but I didn't wait to get dressed, I can tell you. I broke all records getting out into the paddock with my trousers in my hands. Quite exciting for yours truly. Fritz hasn't put any more there since, so we're hoping he's forgotten us. I went through the town of Ypres, which is in ruins. It was a bright moonlight night, so we were able to get a good look at the ruins as we passed through. It was a sad sight to see a once beautiful city in ruins. Here and there, 1 or 2 towers are left standing. It seemed to me in the shadows of the moonlight that the towers were standing guard over this city of ruins. Fritz was busy this night, so we couldn't stay too long to sightsee. The letter concludes with the date, finish December, probably December 1916, and there's a postscript. Well, dear, I hope you enjoy this bit of scribble, for as we've shifted to another part of the line since I started, and I'm back in my old battery, 47th Battery, 12th Field Artillery Brigade, I haven't much time for writing. I hope this gets home to you all right. Things are not too bad where we are at present, so don't worry about me, as I'm coming home all right. With lots of love to you all, and all at home, Les. The second letter, which was dated January the 11th, 1919, was written after armistice. Dear Tot, well, dear, at last your prayers are answered, and barring accidents, I'll be back home borrowing money from you again within the next few months. Tonight, dear, I've been thinking of how lucky I've been through these last 3 years. Never for a moment have I ever thought that I would be coming home again. The odds were too much against it, old girl. But here I am, in the best of health and a better man than I ever was. My sympathies go out to those for whom waiting must never cease. But again, dear, they have the consolation their lads died as men. It's hard, I know, but still I can't understand a chap not coming over here who could get away. Even when I left, I used to feel ashamed of myself, and God knows I'm no hero. We've all been talking over old battles for the benefit of some lads who have just come over. The old soldiers' stunts, but much of the stories told recall the humorous side. Not too often do our thoughts turn to such places as Bullecourt, Messines, and our never-to-be-forgotten days at Passchendaele and Ypres. Someday, when I've forgotten the horrors of these places, I'll tell you some of the incidents that we recall tonight. I've often thought of the promise I made for the continuation of my letter. But dear, for your sake, and the sake of those at home, I didn't write it. Just as well, it will be better in the telling. These last few months of warfare have not been too bad, as most of the time we've had Fritz in front of us. But I'll tell you a little about the Germans' advance in March. This little paragraph is the horse tragedy. About the end of February 1918, we were out resting about 6 miles from the line when Fritz started pasting us with long-range shells. After many narrow squeaks, it was decided that we would move, but before that could be done, Fritz landed a shell amongst our horses. God, I'll never forget that sight. In all, we lost 74 horses killed and 18 wounded. It used to break us up more to see a horse go out than a man. To look into a horse's eyes, it would nearly make a man howl. In fact, we had a horse for 2 years, and just recently it was badly wounded. One of the roughest of our boys walked up to it and went away with tears rolling down his cheeks. Until we could get our horse reinforcements, we were practically out of action, but managed to shift a few miles to a place called Rebec. We were in support of the Portuguese. We stopped there a week and then moved on to the other side of Bethune. One night, word came through to go into action east of Arras. We went there that night and stayed the next day. News came that Fritz had broken through the Portuguese at Rebec, so we went back there at the gallop. Gee, it was some trip. Never will I forget the sights I saw the next morning. We were on the road with guns stripped waiting to go into action, and at the time there was an endless stream of refugees with their few belongings fleeing from Fritz. If ever I felt glad I was a soldier, it was that morning. It was hard to look at the kiddies who didn't understand, and the women. Some of them even then could smile and wish us good luck. It was then that wonderful spirit of the French was shown to us. At last we got the word to move on, and sure we were glad, for always through this the waiting had been the hardest part. Real action is nothing, for then we have the excitement, but waiting one is likely to remember they have nerves. We passed through Rebec into the outskirts of a village called Chalon-sur-Lise, where the guns went into action. 3 of us went into the village on patrol, and even then not all the civilians had gone, for we brought some of them out that night. When we were relieved, there was wine, champagne and beer in any quantity. Most of us were more or less drunk and kept on firing into the night. Towards daylight, there were flares going up on all sides, and I for one thought that our next move would be into Germany as prisoners. When daylight at last came, we made the discovery that the enemy was only a few yards away. I won't bore you with the details of how the drivers got us out of that fix, or of our next with the 81st Highland Division. All the gunners at their own request formed themselves into infantry and formed up on the La Bassée Canal. Fritz made a mistake by not coming right through on that day, for reinforcements came up and the line was established in front of Saint-Venant and Rebec. After the hustle and bustle of the first few days, life was great, and we had a swell time living on the best poultry, plenty of vegetables and drink. Things didn't liven up as we had expected, although we were in the line most of the time. At the beginning of August, we were pulled out and entrained from Lingpre, a village a few miles from Amiens, which is a really lovely place, noted for its cathedral. We had all spent happy days there on our first visit to the Somme in 1617. The thoughts that it would be in ruins came hard on us, but we were surprised to find that, barring the railway station and a few houses here and there, it was practically unscathed. The cathedral had escaped the usual fate of such buildings in war zones. We went into action at Villers-Bretonneux on the night of August the 7th, and the next day Fox's great offensive commenced. It was great to have Fritz on the run again, although dear, he made it jolly hot for us at times. Never will I forget those nights when he made life a little hell with bombs. Through all this, I was waiting for my leave to come through for England. I never expected to get there, so you can wonder that a man can hardly credit his luck. And on armistice, we were on our way back into action when word came through about the armistice. Were we glad? Answer that, dear. Since the armistice, we've had a good time, and at present, we're real well off. Well, dear, I will have to draw this to a close, hoping you're well, and that you will come through your nursing exams. Remember me to all at home with fondest of love. I remain your loving brother, Liz. I'm Ron Jury, Gunner Leslie Edward Jury's son. These letters which I've read to you were written by Dad to his sister, our Aunt Tot, while he was away on service. The letters only came to light after Dad's death, and Aunt Tot took me aside and gave me these faded pages which were tied together with a little safety pin, and said she'd kept them herself through the years and would I look after them. And of course that served the basis for all that we've read to you tonight.
Town has no remedy, no trust in me, my enemy. Lost in the atmosphere, and I'm crawling down this lonely trail, calling out again and again. Hold on to me, it's all that I need. With every breath I feel, I'll disappear. I lose myself, there's no one else. Fragile, why can't you see? Don't understand this fateless hand. Who am I supposed to be? Now I'm torn